Welcome back to another week of Dolphin Financial Radio. Today, we're going to be talking about the FIRE movement. Have you heard of this? F.I.R.E, Financial Independence, Retire Early. We did a show way back when. Got to be maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I'll put it up here if I can find it. We did a show about it with my co-host, Tony Shore. Here he is. Tony, there you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
Remember we did a show when this was pretty popular? And I
remember.
I don't know if you remember. But
I remember.
I tore it apart a little bit, I said they should call it the FI movement, F-I, because the RE was something I disagreed with at the time, because I said, yeah, financial independence is something great, of course, but retiring early, why? And I think the idea was, and the idea still is, there's still a very strong FIRE movement. Build up a lot of wealth as a young person and then just call it quits and relax for the rest of your life. Retire early. So I want to talk about it today in the new context of the guy, not the guy, but probably was one of the guys that really got behind it. He's the one that maybe pushed it and coined the term.
Yeah, because he's a very well-known financial writer and journalist, and he really wrote about it and pushed it. And so really that kind of kick-started the FIRE movement. Right.
And he goes by Financial Samurai. So I'll put the link here below for those watching on YouTube. But you can Google him. I suggest you do.
It's a good read. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's been blogging and writing about his experiences. And in 2012, he retired. I think he was on Wall Street for maybe a dozen years or so, made up enough money, and him and his wife retired, and the rest is history until it wasn't, because in April of 2023, he's put a blog article, which I've linked below, about how he's going back to work.
He has to sadly give up on retirement. I think that's the name of the article. Sadly giving up on retirement. But what I find interesting about it, and our listeners will see this if they read it, is that it's funny because his article about why he has to give up and what happened really illustrates some points you've driven home on a few shows, including that original FIRE show. As I was reading it, I remember our discussions about retiring early, and we've talked about retiring early, not just on the FIRE show, but FIRE is a specific movement. And it is funny because there's a few things, and I don't want to jump ahead because I know you probably have an agenda or what order you want to talk about this, but there are a couple of things in the article that really jumped out at me. And I said, well, that's your problem that you did that. And then I'm like, oh, you did that. I'm like, for such a smart financial guy who wrote all these articles, and he even wrote a book that was a bestseller on finance. He sure got a lot of things wrong in there. He probably should have been using you as a financial advisor, Dan, is my thing.
No, I'm going to disagree with you, Tony, because I would have said, don't retire.
Right.
My specialty is retirement, but I'm working with people that retire after a career of working. I don't have clients that want to retire in their 30s. I just don't. I wouldn't recommend it, and I want to go through why. And I really like this guy. I'm not throwing him under the bus. I know.
Yeah, no, he makes a lot of great points. He's a great writer.
Right. And the blog post about why he's going back to work was very well written, and it kind of I want to highlight what it was, what derailed him from his retirement, what's making him come out of retirement. And the number one, Tony, you know it, kids.
He retired. That's what derailed his kids. FIRE. He would have probably made it, maybe. We'll get to the other reason that he didn't make it, which is 2022, which I really want to pick your brain about, because I have some distinct feelings about what he says in the article about that. But just the opening sentence, he's like, ways to pay for college, kids, daycare. It's like, him and his wife planned to retire in their 30s, but he didn't factor in children because he didn't have any yet. And what a wake-up call that was for him, right?
Well, it was also a defining moment for him, because that's what he was excited about, is having kids. I think, if I recall, he was having trouble having kids, and then they had them after this. and that changed his life for the better.
Yeah, they couldn't have children, so that's why they didn't plan for them. But then all of a sudden they did.
and he calculates sending the kids to college in 12 to 15 years will cost him $1.5 million. So he's like, that's not part of my plan.
Yeah.
Living off of my interest, passive income, generating another 1.5 million to be ready to go and completely spend in 12 to 15 years is not on my radar. So that was problem number one. And I'm not going to get into, we did a show. I don't know if you remember, we did a show called Want to Retire Successfully, Don't Have Kids. I think that's what the name of it was.
And that's the crux or the nut of this article. I'll tell you that. I laughed out loud when I saw why he had to go back to work, why his retire early failed. It's because he had children. And I'm like, yes, children. Because having three of my own,
Right. I think we calculated it was like $500,000 just to get them to 18 or something like that.
Yeah. It's
not even college.
Yeah.
Right. So if he's worried about college, just wait until he gets the soccer bill and the daycare and the food. Right.
Yep. Right.
So that was interesting to say. So, but when it comes to my clients, retirees, this isn't a big issue except grandkids. So, hey, grandma, grandpa, I want to go to college. Can you pay for me? Hey, grandma, grandpa, I'm getting married. Help me pay for the wedding. So this is something that people in their 60s or 50s, 60s, 70s need to consider as, hey, if I retire, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle these kids? For most people, it's not my kids, not my problem, right? And their own kids, hey, I need bail money. I'm in my 40s and I'm, I made a bad decision. So, but for most people retiring early, kids aren't a factor because you're already past that age. Those, when we say retire early, like in your 30s, right? So that was
FIRE is about retiring really early in your 30s or 40s. Yeah.
Right. Well before your main earning years, right? It doesn't make sense to me. But again, insurance. This was another thing he brought up on the side. He said he's looking forward to getting a new job and getting back on the employer-sponsored health insurance because it's not cheap to pay for your own insurance. I think people don't realize how much their company spends on insurance. We just did a whole show on that. I'll put it up here. So
but you can't have kids and not have work employer-sponsored insurance. I mean, it's not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, you remember the show I did where I talked about how I raised the deductible to the max and then that very same year, my kid broke his arm. The other one hit his head, cracked it open. So it's like they were waiting to do crazy things when I raised my deductible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, somehow the insurance companies are working with God to destroy your life when you least expect it or have the least amount of coverage.
Or it was just a bonehead move by me. Hey, I got some crazy boys at home on bunk beds. Let's see what we can do. Let's raise a deductible.
So, but one thing that stood out to me about this article and about having to go back to work after retiring early, one of the reasons is he stayed home. He did manage, he said, to stay home for 5 years with his son until he was able to go to kindergarten full time. So he was a stay-at-home dad. So he did not go back to work right away. He was a stay-at-home dad. And then he, an additional year because of the daughter that they had after the son. And then he said, okay, I'm a stay-at-home dad. But then he said, I had to go back to work after that because of the 2022 bear market. And this is what I want to ask you about, Dan, because in here, he said the 20% decline in the S&P 500 took 7% away from their net worth, and his kids' 529 plans got hit equally as bad because of bonds performing terrible as well. And he said our funds are in index target date funds. So not only he made a few mistakes here, right? I mean he had everything in the market that he had. And that's probably because he thought he had time. But if you're not working, he almost, if you retire, whether it's at 20, you retire at 25 and you're never going to work again, or you retire when you're 72, it doesn't really matter. You still have to have, if you're not going to have income from a job and that job security, you still have to have a balance. You can't leave everything at risk like he did, can you?
Well, you can, and you should if you're not going to touch it. So
apparently he was using it to live on, though.
Well,
I think.
Well, right. The idea was passive income. So a lot of in his income is from real estate generating passive income.
That's true. Okay, so real estate was smart. Okay,
that did well, but where the bear market hurt him, market's down 20%, bonds are down, 10%. His portfolio was down 7% overall. That means he probably lost more than 20% on the stocks, balanced by the real estate. So, but even a 7% down year is tough for him because he's living off of that. When the value of these things go down, a lot of times, and the passive income will go down too. Not to mention inflation gone up, so he needs more to live, yet he's not adding to his pool because he's not working anymore. And so this is the typical retiree situation. I'm retiring. I'm not going to be adding anymore. Now I have to distribute from this. So if you don't touch the money and it goes down 10% and back up 11% and you're flat, well, that's fine. But if it goes down 10% and you're pulling out while it's going down and you're generating income and not reinvesting, then it takes even more to come back. And I think that's what he experienced. Not to mention he had some new expenses, AKA kids. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, wait, my $100,000 I was planning to live off of is not enough because it doesn't pay for Johnny and Susie. So I need more income. Where do I get it from? You just can't generate income out of thin air. You either have to go back to work or you have to take more risk or you have to invest differently. And so that's kind of what's happened. And I think the bear market really hurt him. And that would hurt retirement. Think about the retirees that retired in 2022 that left their money in the target date fund. By the way, to address that, what should you asked me to do this last week. You said we should do a show on asset allocation, and yes, we should. But in a nutshell, the target date fund says this is where I'm going to retire, and so he probably didn't put I already retired, because then he'd have a lot of low risk assets theoretically. He probably still had a long-term horizon where you can have 80% of your assets at risk, but that's because you have long-term time horizon.
Yeah, exactly. So he said my funds are in index target date funds. Why would somebody who's already retired have their funds still in index target date funds?
I don't know. I think maybe it's just easy. So let me just give me the target date 2060 fund. I'm going to retire in 40 years. And so let them do their work. You're better off doing your own thing.
So you're saying what he did right, though, is like he had real estate as well. And he invested in private real estate across the heartland, he said. And it's been a bright spot with all their rental properties fully occupied for years. So that's a plus. And I'm surprised, though. I mean, this guy is saying, I have to go back to work. I can't afford it. But he wrote a best-selling book called Buy This, Not That. I've read excerpts. I have not read the full book, but everything I've read about it, the reviews and the excerpts, I listened to part of the audiobook, sounded pretty good. It's kind of like your idea about spending. I mean, he echoes some of the things you say. Yeah. How to spend. It's the tagline is how to spend your way to wealth and freedom. And so it's interesting.
Exactly. But again, Tony, we go back to problem number one. All right. Hey, honey, we're not going out for dinner. We're going to make our own food. Okay. No problem. But daddy, that's a different. Daddy's saying, coming from kids is like, oh, do we not want to send them to school, or do we not want to buy them?
Can we go get an ice cream cone?
Right.
Johnny's family had ice cream last night. Yeah.
You couple that with negative performance in the market, and you're like, wait a sec, that was supposed to stay, right? So he had this confluence of events, life change. And so,
and that happens to all of us, right?
Right. And going back to the idea of the bad bear market. Now, let's say you're retiring for real and you're 60. Then we have a bear market. Well, that hurts because you're pulling money out of it. In addition, he was not only just taking income from it, he was not getting any more in. So what happens is he lost his 401k match. And he mentions that in the article is like, it would be nice to start a job where I can start getting profit sharing from the company or adding to it, getting a match because, hey, the market's down, let's buy. And you can't do that when you're sitting on no income. You just got to ride the wave. Whereas when the market's down and you have income, you can throw some into the market. Now he could reallocate. Okay, the market's down, the real estate market's doing well. You could take some profit or sell some real estate and put that into the market when it's down to kind of rebalance your portfolio. But not having an employer match anymore is painful. For him, it was painful because he's not adding. But for retirees, a typical retiree, I'm making 100,000 salary. I'm going to retire at 60. Really, they're not making 100,000. They are, but they might be putting 20% away in 401k. So they're really making 80. So people forget that. They forget how much they've been saving. And when you stop working and you're no longer saving, it goes both ways. You're no longer saving, so you feel, I got more income. Why do I have all this income?
Yeah.
At the same time, you're not saving. So when the market doesn't do well, you're not adding to it. And you're like, that it says it's down 10%. I'm actually down 10%. How does that work? It's different. Right. It's different. Two more things that I noticed from this article. And I get this a lot for typical retirees is, when both spouses retire, one eventually goes back to work, not because they need the money. It's because they just want to get out of the hair of the other one.
Right.
He mentioned that 24/7 is great, my wife and I, but at the same time, I need that break.
Yeah.
You
do.
I remember growing up, my dad, he was an English teacher and he worked summer schools as well. Summer school principal, I think he was. And he taught driver's ed. And I'm like, why is he working all these jobs? And because we needed it. There was 4 boys and he worked. But I remember certain days, like on the weekends, where's Dad? He's in the garage fixing stuff. Where's Dad? He's going to get gas in the car. Didn't he just fill it up yesterday?
Yeah.
Now I'm seeing it. It's like, yeah, he just wanted to get out of the house. That's what especially with 4 boys running around.
Yeah. Same with my dad. He's tinkering with the tractor. Yeah. Why?
Does it really need to be tinkered with? No. Nope. Does he need some alone time? Yeah. So that was an interesting comment he made on that. And even with kids, it's like, yeah, I just need a break from the kids. Can I have a home office? Probably. Do I like having my own office? Yeah. Especially during the summer when the kids are out. But here's the big one, Tony. And this was I think the goal of the article and what he was saying, the real reason. Because let's be honest, it's not about the money. He joked about getting a $40,000 job and after taxes and everything. That's not going to make or break him. That's certainly not enough to pay for college for the 2 kids. It's more about being bored, not having a purpose. And this was the warning I said when we first did the show back years ago. The idea of retiring early sounds great until you do it. And then it's like, what are you doing with your life? What do you think about the people that inherit money from their parents? You think about the movies, the stereotypical, benefactor. They run around, do stupid things, and they don't.
Right.
They don't have a purpose. Now, having kids might be a purpose, but what are you teaching your kids when you're at home doing nothing? You need to be active. You need to have a purpose, or else you get bored real easy. And I think that's what he said. And I want to just quote him from the article here. He said, quote, "Don't think that just because you reached your target net worth, got that promotion, had the children, whatever it was, you'll be forever happy. You'll be elated for a bit, and then it's back to your steady state of being," end quote. So again, we've done shows on happiness and it's about relationships. It's about having a purpose. And if it's just about the money and you're just not working because you just don't want to work, that'll get old real quick. It will.
Yeah. it will get really old. And I mean, even this guy in his article, though, he said, I'm too old and tired to work as hard as I did before. So I need a job that's fun or less stressful.
Well, currently, I mean, the FIRE movement's kind of faded out a little bit, and now it's the hustle movement, the side gig movement.
Yes.
That's going to fade out too, because you get tired of it. You get burned out. And, with the FIRE movement, it's like save, eat beans and rice. And then when you have the money, it's like, well, I don't want to eat beans and rice anymore. And then you start spending real money, and it's like, oh, geez, I need a lot more than that. I can't live, there's this, it's not easy just to flip a switch.
No.
And you're right. I think the kids was the big one, and having a bear market was strike two. But I think the real reason was just get bored. What are you doing?
That's true. I think for a lot of people that would be it too. Yeah. And a lot of people think it is going to be for them. Oh no, I know I can flip a switch. It will be like flipping a switch. If I decide to do something, I'll do it. But then they realize after getting into it, it isn't that easy. You may think you can just flip a switch and do something, but you cannot. It's hard.
In retirement, people come to me, do I have enough to retire? What do I need? And income, blah, 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 all the things we talk about. But really, the successful retirement comes down to non-financial things. Once you get your ducks in a row, which he did, he had his ducks in a row. A left hook came out of nowhere. Mike Tyson came and said, boom, here's your plan. 2 kids, haha.
Exactly.
But the good news is he's realizing, I got to make some changes, and that's okay. But I think this happens all too often. So people say, I want to retire. When they do, they have the money. They either don't spend it because they never have, and they still have trouble spending it. We just did a show on that. Or they get so bored, they're like, I got to go to work just because I'm bored. Social connections and things to do. You can only golf so much. So,
right. That's true.
Some balance in between, I guess, is the answer. It's a dramatic change. Money starts the conversation, but it's usually finished with something unrelated to money.
Put out the fire.
Put out the fire. That's what we'll call the show. Put out the fire.
I love it.
Well, Tony, thanks for humoring me another week. Any other thoughts on, are you going to retire early?
No.
Well, think about it. Who in your family has retired early? Your grandfather? No. He retired early, but he didn't retire, did he?
No, he never retired fully.
Your dad's retired, but he's still working on the farm, tinkering, right? So, I guess if you have a decent hobby that you like, keeps you busy.
If you like what you do, I mean, I know it's cliche, but I do like what I do, so.
That makes one of us. All right, Tony. We'll catch you next week,
you
everyone.
love your job.
Have a good show. Have a good week.
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Riddle nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.